This book is really quite an achievement in tracing the history of migrations throughout the world. What would you say is the most important lesson it teaches us as we debate the issue today?
Well, first of all, it says that there's no such thing as immigrants in general, that there are immigrants from different places with radically different skills, that every group has a very pronounced pattern, has a pronounced pattern of skills. If you look, for example, among the Germans, you find them brewing beer in Germany, in the United States, in Buenos Aires, and Australia. You find them making lenses in Germany and here and other places. You find people settling. They don't even settle at random. The lady mentioned how there's a Central American community in Washington. That is very typical. People who move from Italy to Australia do not move from Italy in general to Australia in general. They'll move from one town in Sicily to one town in Australia. And a town a couple of miles away from that town in Sicily will send nobody because there is not the knowledge built up there. And so the knowledge builds up in this one little Sicilian town about this one little tiny part of Australia. And that's where the people go.
When a group transfers its culture from where the culture may have evolved to a new host country, what's happening exactly? Is the assimilation process not working, or is there some balance?
That also differs from group to group. I mean, there are some groups that come over and within one generation they've practically disappeared into the larger society. Germans have had a very tenacious culture. When I was doing research for this book, I remember walking through a graveyard in South Australia, in which every gravestone was in German. And in the hotel you could buy the German language newspaper that was 100 years old. So, and of course they were brewing beer, needless to say. But in other places they assimilate much faster.
What explains the remarkable persistence of some groups? No matter where they travel around the world, they seem to not only carry those cultural traits with them, but in some cases they're highly successful regardless of where they are.
Well,
I think Sol just made an interesting point right there. He said some cultures will integrate and they'll, more or less vanish, within one generation. And he gave the example of the German culture in Australia, where all of the, tombstones were in German. So I don't see a problem with either position. I don't really see a problem with, cultures who want to keep their, cultural ethnic identity going. And by virtue of that, that means you have to some degree, discriminate against other cultures, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to marrying, when it comes to prolonging the next generation. I don't really see a problem with that. You got African families and cultures who want to keep their line, African, their family line African. Same thing with Asians, Mexicans. But there is a double standard where if you're European or American, you can't really say that type of shit. I think that's interesting. So, but I don't really see a problem with, integration or somebody who, whether you're black or you're white, we just need to treat everybody equal, you know what I'm saying? So I don't really see a problem with, a black person saying, they want black babies, or a white person saying they want white babies. You see what I'm saying? If you one side, you can't say it, but if you the other side, then you can say that all day, you know what I'm saying? So
that's a great question. I'm still struggling to get people to admit that there are these patterns, because the prevailing doctrine in social science is that the group is really the creature of the surrounding society, of the institutions and the biases and so forth. And so one of the keynotes of the whole book and of my studies in general is that these groups have their own internal patterns. And you can see that very dramatically in many groups.
So you identify some groups that seem to be successful, yes. No matter who are they. You mentioned Germans.
The overseas Chinese, who are fascinating because the overseas Chinese are successful everywhere in the world. The Chinese are successful everywhere in the world except China. And then you can also say of the Indians that by and large they are successful everywhere in the world.
Damn, that's true if you think about it, man.
Because India, their culture.
What major city doesn't have a Chinatown?
There are so many restrictions.
Think about it.
I remember an Indian businessman in California saying how he's visiting his son in Silicon Valley. He's trying to get him to come back to India. And the son won't go because here he can move ahead on his own merit. In India, they have more quotas and preferences than we do and have had them longer. And he knows that if he's not with the right group, why then he's not going to go anywhere. And so he says, forget it. Just stay here in Silicon Valley.
Well, did you write this book because of today's immigration debate, or is it tied into...
Oh, no, good heavens. I started this book in April 1982. So today's immigration debate was...
That no matter where they go, they seem to have them. Why does that happen? And in a culture like ours, where we're pushing assimilation, couldn't that interfere with that process?
Well, I think the groups that have a full range of skills, they have businessmen, they have workers, they have the whole range. They can have their own little enclaves. And in fact, the Germans and the Jews at one time had that kind of system. You could live on the Lower East Side of New York and have your own doctors, your own businessmen, your own stores, everything, speaking Yiddish every day without a word of English, and go on and live a lifetime that way.
Is that good?
It has its pluses and minuses. But if you have a group that is mostly unskilled workers, then they have to work for somebody else, and they have to be able to understand somebody else's language. And so it's crucial for them to acquire
the Americans. I know most of the viewers out there who want immigrants to speak English.
Most of the immigrants themselves want to speak English. Well, the reason there's a controversy is that you have many activists, both from within the group and people in the larger society, who want to keep them foreign. But most of the immigrants themselves want to become Americans.
He said the immigrants themselves want to become Americans, but it's the activists, and he didn't say it, but I'ma say it, more or less the left, you know, because Thomas Sowell is a conservative. So the left and the activists are the ones trying to keep the immigrants as more or less immigrants with that sort of designation. I mean, isn't that why they're coming to America, if you think about it? Well, maybe the immigrants and the people on the left need to start asking themselves if the left really has their best interest in mind, because I don't know, man. That's an interesting point.
Navasota, Texas. Thanks for calling Borderline.
Hello, yes, I have a question for Mr. Sowell.
Shoot.
Mr. Sowell, I live in Germany, and I went there 10 years ago, and I'm an American. And when the borders fell in Berlin, and we let East Germany be a part of West Germany, now we're all one, we realized something that is basically happening with Mexico here in America. And my question is, because of Yugoslavia and all of the other countries that are infiltrating into Germany, don't you think there's a lot more land here in America, and why the greed?
You asked me about greed.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is, if we're a land that in God we trust, and Jesus says, let the children come to me, wouldn't you agree that we need to open our arms to Mexico?
No, because every country has to protect its own borders. There was a time when virtually every country in the Western Hemisphere not only allowed but encouraged immigration on a massive scale because they had the land and needed the resources and so on. It's not at all clear that if you were to throw the borders wide open, let anyone come who wants to, that this would still be the same country 50 years from now. And so, in a sense, you can't let everybody come to America, because if everybody came to America, it wouldn't be America anymore. So that's not an option that we have.
You see, and I don't think when Thomas Sowell or when people reiterate and when people say things like, you know, America won't be America anymore, you know, if you want to take the slogan, make America great again, right? I don't think that's a statement that alludes to making America white again. I don't believe that shit at all. What I think that statement means is, because black people have always been in the country, I mean, if we keep it honest, but obviously white people were the majority for a while. They like to use the whole stolen land argument and argue that, oh, well, this land was stolen from Native Americans anyway, so, you know, this is our land anyway, whoop-de-whoop. As far as keeping America, that really just has to do with cultural identity, you know, speaking the English language, you know, things like that. That's what I think. You know, if obviously, you know, millions and millions of Latinos and Asians and Indians are coming in and they come in speaking their native language, then, you know, that's a coherent argument. You know, with that being said, I don't think this has anything to do with skin color when this point is made. And I think Thomas Sowell is, you know, made a coherent point. So
we should come to America. How should we decide?
Oh, that's a much tougher one. But I think that we should say that we do have the right to decide, and that people who come here from country X do well and make America a better place, then let more people come here from country X. And if people who come from country Y simply come here and become a burden on the American taxpayers, then less people should come from country Y. One of the problems we have is that the welfare state makes it very expensive to let immigrants in. So you have a country like New Zealand, whose total population is less than that of New York City. And they have all kinds of barriers against immigrants. They got 60 million sheep there and 3 million people, and vast amounts of empty land. But the point is, once you put your foot on New Zealand soil, you're entitled to all kinds of benefits at the expense of the taxpayer, and therefore the taxpayers don't want you. So it's not just a question of the number of people in the land, it's a question of what kind of system do you have. And one of Germany's problems, one of the reasons of the great hostility to immigration in Germany, is that they are a welfare state. If this was a place where you come in and it's up to you to support yourself, I suspect you'd have a lot less resistance to immigration.
Okay, let's talk to
the fact that it's a welfare state, and the fact that ultimately the middle class and the taxpayer is the one who suffers, and all this funding that's diverted to certain special programs for them and that sort of thing. Ultimately the taxpayer and the middle class suffers. So great point. I think if it was a different system, I think the system is the problem. Where if it was a system where taxpayer didn't suffer, I think people would have a problem with that. So.
Paul, thanks for calling.
Thank you, Dr. Sowell. I'm a big fan of yours, and I urge you to keep up the good work. You're really think a lot of you. I think I guess I have one premise, and then I guess maybe two premises here. I think that it's important that for the sake of our national identity and for public policy reasons, I think that immigrants largely assimilate. They learn to speak the language, they learn the bourgeois work ethic, these sorts of things. And I guess kind of is proof of that is that before we had this huge welfare safety net, immigrants who came here had to learn those sorts of things, and they seem to be absorbed into American society quicker, simply because of necessity. They had to become one of us, so to say. And I would just like your comments on that.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. While some groups did retain their languages and customs and so on, even the Germans eventually began to speak English. And once the younger generation came along and learned English, why then the whole group over time very quickly became assimilated. But again, it is the welfare state. It's more than that. It's the so-called multiculturalism, which is really encouraging people to paint themselves in their own little corners and try to make it on their own. And that is one of the most horrible thoughts to me, because if there's one thing I've learned from all the years I've spent doing research for this book, it is that every nation, every great civilization has borrowed heavily from the rest of the world. The very paper that we use, was invented in China. The letters were a Latin. The numbers came from India. You go through the whole list there. And what you're saying to various people is you're to be off in your own little world and make it all on your own. And I just don't think that can be done. No one's done it so far.
Okay, when we come back, we want to hear from you. Should immigrants be allowed to stay in enclaves?
Thomas Sowell just made the point that multiculturalism, has encouraged people to stay in their certain enclaves, sort of isolate themselves from other groups and resist this sort of integration. For example, like when we were all in high school, the different groups used to sit with each other. So the Asians would sit with the Asians, the blacks would sit with the blacks. I used to sit with all my black friends. I used to hang out with only black people when I was in high school, when I was a teenager. So I think that's a product of what Thomas Sowell is kind of alluding to, where it's kind of multiculturalism, excluding whites, by the way, but just everybody, every other group except whites, to really embrace their culture and to really identify with their culture and to really lift us up. In response to all that stuff that happened in the past, we have to start hyper-identifying with our culture. Say aloud, I'm black and I'm proud, Black Lives Matter, Black Student Union, all that sort of shit we used to have in school. So in a society like America, where everybody integrates to the same culture and everybody begins to speak English and adapt to the same sort of cultural style, integration is a good thing. Once we're all citizens of this country and we start to embrace each other and, bring, the different skills that we bring to the table, then, mixing is a good thing. I don't think there's a problem with that.
The country has a right to expect immigrants, if you will, to learn the language, to dress in the national culture, and to assimilate to that extent.
And the outward things, certainly.
Okay, let's talk to Diana in Great Falls, a first-time caller. Thanks for calling.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Sowell, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I actually have two questions. I have been really surprised that more black leaders have not spoken up because basically it seems to me that it's the black people who have lost the most through job opportunities with this unlimited immigration. I'll give you an example. I noticed this under the Carter administration back when I used to be a waitress in a restaurant. And we'd have a job opening and we'd get 50 calls from Washington, D.C., from black people, you know, who wanted a job. And the management of the restaurant would end up hiring an illegal Mexican to do the work. And I thought this was terrible, whereas before the blacks were always getting those jobs in restaurants and things. This has been, now you've got Indians, Pakistanis, all these different people have taken these jobs over, and it's pushed the blacks more and more into this basically a ghetto existence, except for the few, the minority who've been able to get out, and it's pushed them further into drugs and everything else. This should have been their chance, you know, with the equal opportunity and everything, to get up the ladder and to really assimilate into the population. It really hasn't happened. My other question, I spent a lot of time in Central America, particularly in the Caribbean basin, and all the blacks up there are immigrating into the United States. And what really shocked me is how quickly they rise up the economic ladder, very quickly become on their own homes and become middle class.
All right, let's get a response.
Well, I guess the first one, in some particular cases, what you said may be true, but there have been studies done of places where there's a heavy Mexican immigration, for example, and the unemployment rate among blacks in those areas tends to be lower than it is elsewhere. There's not some fixed number of jobs from which the immigrants, you subtract the number that go to the immigrants. The immigrants themselves create jobs, both when they're employers and simply by the fact that they increase the national output, which increases the demand and therefore increases the demand for labor. So it's not at all clear to me that the immigrants take the jobs away. What may happen in many cases, however, and in many countries, is that the immigrants, because they come in, particularly at the bottom level jobs, they prevent the wages from rising enough in those jobs to wean people away from the welfare state benefits. And so therefore we end up supporting more Native Americans because of the immigrants. We may not be supporting the immigrants directly, but they will prevent the wages from rising.
All of us have seen examples, though, where we see an immigrant who doesn't speak very good English and they've got a PhD, but they just got here and they know eventually maybe they're going to make their way into, say, the engineering field. But in the meantime, they're going to wait tables.
Yes.
Because they know that it's only temporary, 2 or 3 years, they're willing to work all day for a bucket of fish heads, basically.
Yes.
They're willing to work for no pay. Now, I mean, clearly, you have America.
Y'all gotta realize that the Democratic Party and the left does not fuck with you, bro, and they just use you and spit you out, bro, over and over and over again. So we gotta stop. We gotta wake up and stop supporting these motherfuckers, including all the activists, all them motherfuckers too. All I'm saying is, it seems like somebody more like Thomas Sowell has black people's best interest more so than Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson. Let's keep it real. That's where I'm at with it. So
they're not destined to go to college, or they're not destined to go into the technical fields for whatever reason. Doesn't the influx of that labor pool that's willing to compete on those terms erode the bargaining leverage of Americans who, in a sense, are looking to live a decent life
Well,
for 30 years?
If they plan to work all their lives at minimum wage jobs, which nobody does hardly, yes. But the very same things that allows the immigrant to start off, as many of the Cubans did, shining shoes and moving on up, will allow other people to start off shining shoes and move on up.
Freedom means inequality, by definition.
Yes.
Right? Okay. All right, we got a lot of calls. We'll get back to them right after this word from our sponsors. Borderline, be right back.
Yeah, hi. What was the first question? Should we permit more immigrants? What was that?
What's the question?
Yeah, more immigrants?
Well, how should we select immigrants? If we're going to take them, who should they be?
My subject. We should take more immigrants in, but the right educated ones. I do have my son-in-law, his wife, and his son. They wanted to come to the United States, and they're highly educated. My son-in-law teach at the time on the universities in Germany. So he would not take a job. He was somebody who creates jobs. So those should come in. And all the papers are ready. But because of the changing of the rules in 1964, the immigration rules, he is now on a waiting list and has to wait 3 years until he would be in line. Well, if we have those policies, that would not help us. See, after World War II in 1952, there was a big exodus from Germany to United States. Everybody skilled who came here brought this country up, and that vanished when we changed the immigration laws in 1964 for being just. The Great Society, what was pronounced at that time. So then everybody, we had to be just. Everybody could come in. Well, more or less, the immigration from Germany dried up anyway because Germany had now enough work for their own people there. But still, my son-in-law is willing to come. He will be here in the next 4 weeks anyway on the university in Blacksburg, Virginia. So he, by NATO, he comes over here once in a while, and so they make research. But he was still willing to come over here and lend his capability to the United States.
Damn, bro.
His wife speaks 4 languages. The boy is in German high school, speaks already 3 foreign languages himself. So there should be something done.
All right, thanks. And I think he raises an important point, which is that in 1965, Congress put in place a law that selects now not on the basis of what you know, but who you know. 80% of the immigrants come just because they have a relative came earlier, and that seems to create this reinforcing pattern of immigrants coming in the same country.
And it reinforces the culture. It prevents people from learning to speak English, having to learn to speak English. But this happens all over the world when you have this continuous movement of people in. What happened after the restrictions of the 1920s in the United States was that millions of people who had all the foreign languages and ways slowly began to assimilate, usually with the younger people first and so on. So by about 1940, you no longer had this vast number of people with foreign ways in the United States.
21 laws just brought the numbers down too, right?
It brought the numbers way down.
Well, now you have the immigrant overload in these various communities, then you have the multiculturalism template over that.
Yes.
Is that a threat of some kind?
Yes, because it systematically tries to keep foreign people foreign, even when they, in case of children, their parents want them to become American.
So, talk to Howard.
Man, I loved everything Thomas Sowell said, bro. And to be quite honest, if there was more black people who even knew who he was and just Googled him and looked him up, just that spark alone could, trigger just this effect, in the black community and just, people in general to realize that it's all right to have these viewpoints and, you can be against immigration and still be black. You can be, you can speak out against inner city crime and still be, you can do these things and, people will still respect you. You know what I'm saying? So that's how Thomas Sowell inspired me. So as soon as I started researching who he was and learning more about his work, hey man, that was all she wrote. So we gonna be reacting to some more Thomas Sowell. Let me know if y'all like this sort of content. We gonna be doing some more, or I'll be giving y'all some more of that relationship stuff too. Appreciate y'all always. One love, peace.